Good morning, dear students. My name is Dr. Shuaib Mohammad Bhat. I am working as Assistant Professor in the Department of English at Institute of Aeronautical Engineering, Hyderabad. Today in this video lecture, I shall be discussing with you active and passive voice. One of the important elements in grammar, active and passive voice. So today we shall be just talking about active and passive voice in detail. In the previous lecture, we talked about tenses. There we talked about all the 12 tenses which come under three main tenses like present, past and future tense. We talked about present indefinite, present continuous, present perfect continuous. We talked about past, past indefinite, past continuous, past perfect continuous. We talked about future indefinite, future continuous, future perfect continuous tense. Here in this video lecture, now our next topic is active and passive voice, and this lecture will mainly focus on the tenses. How can we change the forms of tenses from active to passive? So before jumping to the active and passive voice of the tenses, I'll be discussing about the voice, I'll be discussing about active voice, I'll be discussing about passive voice, I'll be discussing about the structure of the sentences for both active and passive voices. Let's see. First, we shall be talking about voice. What is it? What voice is? The term voice is a term that's used to denote the form of the verb which shows if the subject in a given sentence is the doer or the receiver of the action. It's very simple to understand. The voice, it is a term that's used. It is used to denote, it's used to show form of the verb. It shows the form of the verb, which shows, it denotes the form of verb, which shows if the subject in a given sentence is the doer or receiver of the action. And this verb form, it shows us that whether the subject in a given sentence is the doer of the action or is the receiver of the action. Is it a doer or receiver of the action? So these are the two things which the voice shows. I told you voice is a term which denotes the form of a verb. It denotes the form of verb which shows, that form of verb shows us whether the subject in the given sentence is the doer of action, is the doer or is the receiver of action. Subject mainly remains the doer of action. And when we talk about the subject, we speak subject is the doer of action. So here in active and passive, we shall be discussing about whether this subject is the doer or it is the receiver of action or it receives the action. So then the voice of a verb describes the relationship between the action and the participants. The voice of a verb, it describes the relationship between the action and the participant, subject or object in a sentence. This voice of a verb, it also describes the relationship between the action, between the verb and subject and object. And participants means subject and object. So this is what we know by the voice. Voice is a term that is used to denote the form of a verb, and this form of verb, it shows whether the subject in a sentence is the doer of the action or receiver of the action. And the voice of a verb, it describes the relationship between the action which is done in the sentence and the participants, that means subject and object. So this is voice. Voice shows us this relationship between the action and the participants, that means subject or object in a sentence. This is all about voice. Then there are two voices. The two voices in English language. What are the two voices in English language? In English language, we have two voices, and these voices are active voice, passive voice. we have two voices. One is active and another is passive voice. Now we shall be looking upon these two voices in detail, where we shall be talking about the meaning of these voices, and we shall be talking about some reliable definitions of these two voices, active and passive. Here you need to keep one thing, here you need to learn, you must know one thing, that in English language we have only two voices. One is active voice and another is passive voice. Now let's look upon these different voices, active and passive voice. Active voice. What is the meaning and definition of active voice? Active voice in a sentence denotes the noun or pronoun that acts as the subject in the sentence and is the doer of the action. Very simple. This active voice means it denotes the noun or a pronoun that acts as a subject in a sentence. That means active voice is associated with the subject of a voice, and the subject remains noun or pronoun. And this active voice, it shows us that the subject is the doer of the action. So active voice is that voice which denotes the noun or the pronoun that acts as the subject in a sentence is the doer of that action. It is active voice which shows us that the subject of a sentence is the doer of an action. Or we can say in the active voice sentences, it is the subject who is the doer of action. Or in other words, the subject performs the action or acts upon the verb. Or in other words, we can say in active voice sentences, it is subject which performs the action, or it is subject who acts upon the verb. So this is what is the meaning of active voice. Active voice means where subject is the doer of action. Active voice means where subject performs action. Active voice means where subject acts upon the verb, acts upon the action. Then, now we have the definition by Oxford Learners Dictionary. What is the stand of Oxford Learners Dictionary about active voice? Oxford Learners Dictionary says, the active voice is defined as the form of a verb in which the subject is the person or the thing that performs the action. You will see a lot of resemblance between this definition and with the Oxford Learners Dictionary's definition. Lot of resemblance is there, lot of relevance is there. You will see both the definitions, they speak one thing but in different way. So Oxford Learners Dictionary, it says, active voice is defined, it is the form of verb in which subject is the person or thing that performs the action. So active voice is defined that form of verb in which subject means a person or a thing performs the action, where subject is the doer of action, where a person or a thing which is the subject of a sentence is the doer of action. It performs the action. This is what Oxford Learners Dictionary says about subject. Then I would like to quote Collins Dictionary. What Collins says? It defines active voice as a voice of verbs used to indicate that the subject of a sentence is performing the action or causing the event or process described by the verb. Collins speaks one and the same thing. It is a voice of verbs which is used to indicate that the subject of a sentence is performing the action. Subject of a sentence is performing the action, or it causes the event or process described by the verb. It causes, it does. It is the doer of action. So this is what Collins Dictionary said about active voice. So active voice is where the subject, which is noun or pronoun or anything, is the doer of action or acts upon the verb. Oxford Dictionary says, it is the form of verb where the subject performs the action. Collins says, it is a voice of verbs used to indicate that the subject of a sentence is performing the action. Then we have passive voice. What is passive voice? Passive voice, it means it is the voice, the passive voice, it represents that the subject is one acted upon by the action or verb. Here subject is not acting upon the verb. Rather, subject is being acted upon by the verb or action. It is subject which is acted upon by the action. It's acted upon. Subject is not doer of the action. Rather, the action is acted upon the subject. Now, it can also be said that the passive voice indicates that the subject in the sentence is no longer active but passive. Or it can be said about the passive voice that the subject is no longer active in passive voice, but it's passive. It's not doer of action, which makes it active. Rather, it is that element in the sentence upon which action is acted. The action is acted upon the subject, and it makes it a passive element of the sentence. So I can say passive sentence or passive voice means the sentence where the subject is acted upon but is not acting upon the verb. Rather, it is acted upon by the action or verb. Then according to Oxford Learner's Dictionary, the passive voice is defined as the voice as the form of verb. It is defined as the form of verb used when the subject is affected by the action of the verb. It is that form of verb when the subject is affected by the action of verb. Right now, it is not verb which is affected by the subject. Rather, as it is subject which is affected by the action of the verb. Then Collins Dictionary says that passive voice is formed using be and the past participle of the verb. The subject of a verb, the subject of a passive clause does not perform the action expressed by the verb. So Collins Dictionary defined it. It has touched the structure of the sentence. It says passive voice can be formed by using be, auxiliary be, and the past participle of a verb. That's the third form of a verb. And then it says again the same thing. The subject remains passive and it does not perform any action, but the action is performed by the verb. So this is what Collins Dictionary said about passive voice. So the passive voice is that voice where subject is acted upon by the action of the verb. Subject is no longer doer of action, but it is the receiver of action. Oxford Dictionary says the form of a verb used when the subject is affected. Passive voice is that voice where this form of verb is used in such a sense which affects the subject by the action. Collins says we make passive voice by the help of be plus past participle, and the subject remains passive. It's affected by the action of the verb. So this is the meaning and definition of active and passive voice. Now, there are some points which we need to remember while making passive voices. While using the active and passive voice, there are some rules, there are some points which we need to remember. So one rule is, like these points are, in the English language, the active voice is used generally as it gives the information in a direct and clear manner. Remember always one thing: when you have to give a direct and when you have to convey the information in a clear manner, in a direct way, it's always logical, it's always better to use the active voice of the sentence. When you want to be clear, when you want to be direct, when you want to convey your information in a direct way, in a clear way, it's always better to choose active voice of the sentences. Then, the second one, make sure you do not use the passive voice just because you think it sounds better. Use it only if it is necessary. Now, ensure one thing: you are not using passive voice because you feel it sounds better. like the the chart was prepared by him or her. It's better to say he prepared a chart rather than saying the chart was prepared by him. Now it sounds better to speak like the chart was prepared by him rather than he prepared the chart. So we should not use passive voice because we feel it sounds better. No. We should use passive voice only when it is necessary, when it is required, when it is directed to use passive voice. Rather, it's always good to use active voice. Remember that the active voice has the subject doing the action and the passive voice has the subject receiving the action. One more thing which you need to remember while making active and passive voices. When you are forming an active voice sentence, always remember it is subject who is doing the action. And for the passive voice, remember it is subject who receives the action. So in active voice sentences, your subject will be the doer of action. In passive voice sentences, your subject will be the receiver of action. Remember this thing. Then, if you want to communicate your thoughts and ideas clearly and effectively, especially in a professional setup, it would be better or best to use the active voice. Again, if you want to be thoughtful, if you want your ideas to be communicated in a thoughtful way, if you want to communicate your thoughts or ideas clearly and effectively, and especially when you are communicating in a professional setup, it's mandatory to use the active voice. Because when you use active voice, when you pass information active voice, you become more clear and more effective. So these are some rules. Now let's come to the structure. A pro tip for you to master the active voice and the passive voice is to know the structure and formula by which they work. Now, in order to know how these sentences work, it's important, it's mandatory to know the structure of the sentences. For the active sentence, we require subject, verb, and object. For passive voice, we require object, verb, and subject. So when we are having this structure, it clearly mentions, it's easy to understand. Here in the active voice, subject is the doer of action. Then we have verb, then we have object. Object receives the action. Here in the passive voice, it is object who is doer of action. And the subject becomes the receiver of action. So for active voice, it's subject which comes first, then verb, then object. And subject always is the doer of action. For passive voice, it's object, it's verb, then subject. And your subject here becomes the receiver of action. So you need to understand the structure if you want to know active and passive voice better. If you want to use active and passive voice, it's always better to know the structure of both active and passive voice. As I told you, we shall be talking about tenses today only. Before going through the tenses, we have this chart which talks about pronouns. There is a change of pronouns in the active and passive voice. So when converting the active voice into passive voice, or vice versa, or converting passive into active, there are changes in tenses and pronouns. So let's see what are the main changes which occur in the pronouns. For active voice, we use the pronoun I, we, he, she, they, it. For active voice. And for passive voice, I becomes me. Because the subject will be the object in passive voice. We becomes us. He becomes him. She becomes her. They become them. It becomes it. Because whatever here comes in the active voice, they are subjects. And whatever here comes in the passive voice, they are objects. So I is the subject, and when I becomes object, it becomes me. We is the subject. When we becomes object, it becomes us. He is the subject. When he becomes object, it becomes him. She is the subject in active voice. When it becomes object in passive voice, it becomes him, she becomes her. They is the subject in active voice, it becomes them as object in passive voice. It is the subject in active voice, and when we use it as an object in passive voice, it remains it only. No changes there in it. So this you need to understand clearly in order to know these active and passive voices. Now, there are a few other points you have to know so that you can use these voices effectively. What are these few points? Number one, when converting a sentence from active to passive, from active to the passive, the first thing you have to do is to interchange the subject and the object. Remember one thing, when you are going to change active into passive voice, so you need to change and you need to interchange the subject and object. Interchange. The subject in the active sentence becomes object in the passive sentence. This first thing you need to keep in your mind. That is the interchange of subject and object. Your subject will become object in passive. If you are converting passive into active, your object in the passive will become subject in the active sentence. Then, the next part of speech you have to focus on is verb. When converting the active voice into passive voice, you just have to convert the main verb into past participle or its third form. The first thing which you need to keep in mind, you need to focus is the interchange of subject and object. The second thing you need to keep in your mind, you need to work upon is to focus on the verb. Because the verb which you used in active voice will be converted into the third form of the verb. And it is past participle form, that is third form. So if it is I play cricket, it will be cricket is played by me. Played. Play will become played. Play, the base form of verb, present form of verb, will be converted into the past participle or third form of verb. So the second thing to keep in mind is the form of the verb. Then, when you are changing the tense of the main verb, make sure you use an auxiliary verb which maintains the tense the sentence represents. Now, when you are changing the tense of the main verb, when you are changing, see, I play is present. Now, when I say played, it becomes past. Played is the past form, past participle form. So we need to support this verb with an auxiliary verb so that it can maintain the tense in the sentence. Then always use the preposition by before the subject in a passive voice. Before the subject in a passive voice, it's pertinent, it's mandatory to use by before the subject in the passive voice. If there are any adverbs used in the sentence with the active voice, be sure to include it in the passive voice as well. Now, if there is any active voice used, if there is any adverb used in the active sentence, we need to be sure to include it in the passive voice as well. This adverb should be included in the passive voice as well. Then, do not just drop it when you convert sentence into active voice, in the active voice to the passive voice form. So when we are converting active voice into passive voice, if an active sentence contains an adverb, we should not drop the adverb, we should not skip the adverb. Rather, we should also carry it, include it in the passive voice. Now, we have a passive sentence, it includes an adverb. It contains an adverb. When we are changing this passive voice into active voice, it's again mandatory to contain or use this adverb in the active voice as well. So these are almost 5 points which we need to keep in our mind before playing with the adverb, before playing with the active and passive voice. Number 1 is interchange of subject and object. Number 2 is to focus on the verb. because the verb is converted into third form. Number third is the use of auxiliary verbs in order to maintain the tense. Number fourth is the use of preposition by before the subject in the passive voice. Number five is to include adverb if it is used in active, if we are making it passive, to include it in both active and passive voice or vice versa. Now, as I told you today in this lecture, we shall be converting tenses into passive voice. So, we'll go with the tenses. First, we have simple present tense first. Simple present tense. The tense where we use subject, verb first form, or object. And if the subject is I, we, you, they, verb first form, no change. He, she, it, or any name. Verb first form is added by s, es, or ies. There is a definite rule where to use s, where to add s, es, or ies. That I have told you when I was teaching you present indefinite tense. So I revised this because you can understand what is a present indefinite tense. We have the first present indefinite tense, that is, he writes an essay. We have the subject as third person, verb is added with s. So he writes an essay. How can we change it? I told you when we are converting active voice into passive voice, the first thing is interchange of subject. And when we are converting he into passive voice, he becomes him. So this subject will be the object of passive voice. See, it came at the end. Then write is the verb. I told you we need to make third form of the verb, that's written. See, we have the third form of verb. Then I told you we need to use the preposition by before the object, before the subject, before the object of the passive voice. See that we used here, by. And I told you we need to use the helping verbs in order to maintain the tense. He writes an essay is present tense, so that's why I used is. That's why I do not use was. And an essay here is the object, and it became subject here. So it's reverse. When we are converting an active sentence of present indefinite tense into passive voice, the first thing we need to keep in mind is the interchange of subject. So if I write one more sentence here, he plays cricket. So cricket here is the object. But this object will be the subject of passive voice. So then I have to write cricket. Now I need to check the tense. Which tense is this? Present tense. So I will use the helping verb is. Cricket is. Then verb will require third form of verb, that is cricket is played. Now after verb we need to use the preposition by. And then this subject will be the object. And when we are changing pronouns, he becomes him. Cricket is played by him. So this is how we are changing present indefinite tense, active tense or present indefinite into passive. So this is very easy to understand, but it requires your concentration. As long as you show your concentration here, you can find it very easy to understand, because there is not any rocket science behind active and passive voice by which you can feel it is difficult to know it. It's very easy to know it. Only you need to pay attention to certain rules. Now another is Sheena does the housework. Again we have present indefinite tense. The housework is object. It will become the subject, the housework. The tense is present, so is the helping verb of present. Verb is does, it will become done, third form. Preposition by is there. Sheena will remain Sheena, only names are not changed. Then she cares for the rabbit. She cares for the rabbit, present indefinite tense. Now she cares for the rabbit, So rabbit is the object, it will be the subject. So I can say rabbit, then the auxiliary verb, it's present. That means is. The rabbit is care. Third form of care is rabbit is cared. It's cared. Rabbit is cared. C-A-R-E-D, cared by her. So we cannot use for by her. We can only use by her. That's a correction. Then Jacob always plays the guitar. Now here we have this adverb which I told you. If we have adverb in an active sentence, we are converting active into passive. We should not skip these adverbs. We should use them in passive voice. So the guitar is here object. It will be subject in passive, the guitar. Sentence is in present indefinite, that is. This adverb will remain there. The guitar is always. Verb is played. So we have third form of a played. Then preposition by, and Jacob is the name. It will remain same. By Jacob. So there is no correction in the name. No conversion in the name. Name remains same. Because Jacob is Jacob only. Then we have present continuous tense. That is subject plus is, am, are, helping verbs plus verb force form plus object. Like they are eating bananas. So bananas is the object. It will become subject. The bananas. Now its continuous form are. When we are having continuous be becomes being. Are being, verb is third form, eaten by them. So no change in the preposition, and they will be converted into them in the object form. Now there is another sentence, like I will give one more sentence. Bob is drawing a diagram. So diagram will be the object now. A diagram, then is, it is singular is. Be will be being because it's continuous tense, is being. Drawn is the third form by Bob. Now Samta is playing the piano. The piano is being played by Samta. She is waiting for Reena. Reena is being waited by her. Is being waited for. Or for is there, for by her. Now we have another sentence I'll write. She is cooking food. I'll change the sentence into passive. Food or the food, or I can simply say food. It's present tense. So food is singular is. Then be will be being because it's continuous form. Food is being. Then cook, third form of cook is cooked. Then preposition by, and she will be her. Food is being cooked by her. So this is how we can change active sentence into passive sentence, active present continuous sentence into passive present continuous tense. Then present perfect tense. There is no present perfect tense. So present perfect tense is subject plus has, have plus object. It's not good to remember the tenses by their formula, by their structure. I have taught you the sentences, that's why I only go with the structure. Otherwise, it's not good to recognize sentences only by their structure. Because these tenses have a lot of functions which they are playing. The tenses are not only the structures, the construction of structures only. So we have present perfect tense where we have some questions are there, but I'll not go with the questions. I'll not go with the interrogative sentences. I'll go with the sentence. He created this masterpiece. He has created this masterpiece and he has read the newspaper. These are the two tenses. I'll make their passive voice. He has created this masterpiece. This masterpiece is object. So it will be the subject. This masterpiece, it is present. That's why I'm using is. This masterpiece is, create is the verb, so it will be created is the third form and it will again remain same, created, then by, and he will be him. This masterpiece is created by him. I will write one more sentence. He has washed clothes. He is the subject, then it is has, then verb third form, then object. I'll make it passive. So the subject, the object will be subject here. The clothes it is present tense are verb third form washed by, it is he, so it will be him. This is very easy to change the tenses into passive. So interrogative sentence we shall be talking in another lecture. So then again, if it is he has read the newspaper will be the subject. The newspaper is read by him. The newspaper is read by him. There are some correction. So I pardon for the corrections. So now there is one thing you need to know, that is no passive voice formation. There is no passive voice formation for the following tenses. Present perfect continuous cannot be changed into passive. Past perfect continuous tense cannot be changed into passive. Future continuous tense and future perfect tense, perfect continuous tense cannot be changed into passive voice. Let's come to the simple past. Simple past is subject to verb second form object. Ria paid the bills. It's past now, it's not present. The bills were paid by Ria. This object will be the subject, the bills. And it is plural, that's why I wrote were, not was. The bills were, third form of verb, paid by Ria. I'll give one example. She wrote a letter. She wrote a letter. A letter is object, it will be subject. A letter, it is past, it will be was. Verb will be third form, followed by, and object she will be converted into her. A letter was written by her. So this is how we can form the passive voices of past indefinite tense. Then I have another example, that is the teacher called the students. The student was called by the teacher. It was because subject is singular. She did not buy the fruits. The fruits were not bought by her. Then past continuous tense. Active voices, they were waiting for him. Past continuous, it is subject plus was were plus were fourth form. They were waiting for him. So him will be the subject. When him will come into the active voice, when him will be converted into subject, it will be he. And he is singular, it will not be he were. He was, and be will be converted into being because it's continuous form. He was being waited by them. Then I'll tell you one sentence. Shyam was writing a letter. So a letter will be the subject. A letter was, why was? Because letter is singular, was. Then being, because it is the form of be, it's continuous of being. A letter was being, then verb is third form. Written by Shyam. So a letter was being written by Shyam. So this is how we convert present past progressive or past continuous tense into passive voice. So she was playing kabaddi. Kabaddi was being played by her. Then past perfect, it is subject plus had plus verb third form. Like this sentence. I had finished her work. So her work will be subject. Her work had been, had, because the past tense, her work had been is the third form because it's past, finished by me. So I will be converted I will be converted into passive, so it will be me. This is about past perfect. Then simple future. It is subject plus will, shall plus verb first form. He will write a letter. So then a letter will be subject, but here we do not only use be, we use will be. So a letter, because in order to maintain the future tense, we use will. A letter will be written by him. Then he will repair her cycle. Her cycle will be repaired by him. Then let's go with the next tense, that is future perfect, because there is no passive voice for future continuous. Meena will have won the match. The match will have been won by them. They will have won the match. So this match will be the subject here. Then it is future will have. Then it is past future perfect. That's why it is been. Verb third form won, followed by, and then by the object, which is the subject in the active voice. So this is all about the change of voice for the tenses. I would like to recap this whole lecture. First, I talked about voice. I told you voice, it denotes the form of verb which shows if the subject in the sentence is the doer or receiver of action. Then I told you there are two forms of voices. One is active voice and there is passive voice. Then I told you the meaning of active voice. Active voice is that voice where subject is the doer of action. Then I took the help of Oxford and Collins dictionary to define active voice. Then I defined passive voice. There I told you subject is being acted upon by the verb. Then I again took the help of Oxford and Collins dictionary to further define passive voice. Then I told you about some rules. Then I told you about the structure of the active and passive voice. For active voice, it is subject, verb, object. For passive voice, it is object, verb, subject. Then I told you the rule of changing pronouns from active to subject and active to passive and passive to active. Then I told you about some rules which we need to look upon before converting active into passive or vice versa. Then I showed you how present indefinite is changed into passive, then present continuous, then present perfect, then simple past continuous, past perfect, then simple past, future and future tense, future perfect. And this is all about today's lecture. If you need any extra help, you can consult these books. So this is all for today. So thank you for listening me carefully. We shall be meeting very soon for the next lecture. Till then, take care. Goodbye.
Like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.